your community, for the sake of our nation. Hello, my name is Jason Broadwater. I'm going to talk to you today about the state of our economy and what we can do about it here locally in our own communities. So I'm basically going to present that there's a financial crisis right now happening in 2020, yes, but bigger than that, deeper than that, under that, there is an economic crisis in this country, and that what we're seeing now are fractures or reveals kind of showing us that this economic crisis exists. As far as what we can do about it locally, after we kind of hear the gloom and doom, so to speak, we need to talk about what we can do about it. We can't just write it off to folks who are far away. We can apply solutions to our own community and have an impact across the nation. So what's going on in our nation today? Well, there's a civil rights movement like we haven't seen since the 60s. There's a pandemic like we haven't seen in over 100 years. There's disasters, natural disasters in the country. And there's a financial crisis. So when people look at the economy, the media, economists, politicians, they tend to talk about three things: GDP, jobs, and the stock market. So let's look at GDP. The GDP contracted by 32.9%. That's annualized from April to June. This is the biggest drop on record ever since they started keeping track of this stuff. Let's look at jobs. In April, we lost 20 million jobs, largest loss ever on record. Then gained back millions of jobs in August. One of the largest gains, if not the, I'm not sure, but it was big. And we're still down over 10 million jobs at this point from having lost the 20 million originally. So jobs are way off, way off. But when the jobs report comes out, the stock market goes up. One jobs report came out and it was like, oh, well, it was worse than expected, terrible jobs report. Well, but the Dow Jones up 500 points, the stock market was up. While people are out of a job and in danger of potentially losing their home, other people are having a record year or having a great year. Business is great. The PPP loan was great. Stock market's up. Things are great. And then there's all these people having the worst financial crisis of their lives, and there's a disconnect. So what is going on with the economy? The story of the human race, as an economic story, it goes like this. Wealth consolidates and then it redistributes. And then it consolidates and then it redistributes. That's the human story, right? Over time, over the long arc of the human history, the net outcome is towards redistribution of wealth. It's towards wealth growing and being more distributed among more of the population, right? That's the long path. In 1800, you have most people of all nations below the extreme poverty line. Then in 1975, you have most people of most nations above the extreme poverty line. And then by 2015, we have most people of all nations above the extreme poverty line. So over the long haul, wealth is being grown and it's being distributed. But what happens is it consolidates and then it redistributes. It consolidates and redistributes throughout history. And those are the tumultuous times of our lives, of the human story. Right? You have revolution, you have autocratic governments, you have war, going on. The stuff that is the poetry of our lives, But the economics of our lives is basically following that pattern. The founding of our nation, of the United States, was based on a redistribution of wealth and power. It was more democratic. It was a republic government. It was less consolidated to the king, And that whole idea is a redistribution of wealth and power. It creates opportunity for more people. Then wealth consolidates over the centuries, and then you get to the 1920s, and the financial system collapses because you have the top with so much of the wealth. You had the top 0.1% owning more, having more wealth than the bottom 90%, the 90% of everybody, right? That's crazy. And so the financial system can't take it. It collapses and there's a redistribution of wealth. happens in the 40s with FDR's programs, putting people to work, Eisenhower, the Social Security, investing in education, all these kind of infrastructure projects, just like investing in taking the wealth and investing in things that apply to more people, and it spreads the money around. People are getting paychecks, their neighborhoods are nicer, whatever the case. You have that going on all the way through the up into the late 70s. You have this kind of, the bottom 90 has a lot more wealth than the top 0.1%. And that is that time period, which is, the baby boomers experience, the baby boomer lifetime, that's the time in our history where there was the most opportunity, the most widely spread wealth in the whole history of our country, right? So more people than ever and since have access to the wealth that is within the country. And it created that environment where if you work hard, you can succeed. And that's the environment that the baby boomers grew up in, and it's definitely, kind of in the psyche of the generation, but in different places, different times in history, that's true, less true maybe, work hard and you'll succeed. You tell a serf that in medieval England, they might not believe you. But what's happened is the wealth started to consolidate again in the mid-70s, late 70s, took upward turns in kind of the 80s, and then kept going from there. And you've now had the 0.1% has passed again the bottom 90% of the country, like it was in 1929 when everything fell apart. It's pretty predictable that that's going to happen again, and it keeps trying to happen, and then we prop up the economy, right? It tried to happen in '08, and it was kind of too big to fail, and then it's trying to happen now in some ways. But now we're seeing weird fractures going on where you have half of the economy, half of the people doing well and half the people doing terrible. It's definitely a tale of two cities, more than ever or in a long, long time, since the late 20s. Think about it this way. 80% of the population has 11% of the non-financial assets. That's mostly real estate. And 80% of the people have 5% of the financial assets. 5%. So think about the stock market. You're like, oh, the stock market's doing great. For who? It's doing great for the 20% of people who own 95% of the stock market. And I'm not trying to be political here. I'm not suggesting policy. I'm not saying tax the rich. I'm not saying don't tax the rich. I'm just saying this is math. This is like, you can see it happening. You can see the speeding consolidation of wealth to the point where the economy will fail. You can watch it happen. It is written on the wall. It's in plain sight. This is the economic crisis, right? The stuff we're seeing happening in 2020 are the alarms, the bells, the whistles to this bigger crisis that we have to address. We have to acknowledge and address. I don't know if the solutions will be more conservative leaning or more liberal leaning or whatever, but we need solutions to this, right? We've got to get the wealth redistributed around the country in the least painful way possible. Okay, so acknowledging that the economic crisis is really about the speeding consolidation of wealth, then we can start to see these other things that people consider the economy, quote unquote, like GDP, jobs, and the stock market in a different light. For example, gross domestic product. GDP has always gone up. It goes down, but then it keeps going up. Over the long haul, it's like looking at the stock market. The trajectory over history, over time, is that it goes up. But when you look under the GDP, what you start to see is something very different. The GDP no longer represents the health of the economy because it doesn't represent how well off people are. GDP became disconnected back in the late 70s from median household income and wages, so that GDP kept on rising and the wages stagnated. So the economy, which matches up to what I was showing you earlier, where you have the widest distribution of wealth. Back then, the GDP tracked with median household income, meaning that as the GDP got bigger, everyone was better off. That's why the GDP became the thing to understand when you're looking at the health of the economy, right? It's like the whole country is bringing in more revenue and everybody's making more profit. That quit being true in the late 70s and hasn't been true since. Now, most people aren't making more money, not much, if any, yet the GDP has continued to soar. So where does the money go? It goes into this pattern of the consolidation of the wealth. Well, the GDP is basically all the spending and the buying that we do in our country. It includes imports and exports, which is the buying that we as a country do from other countries and other countries buy from us. It also includes all of the internal spending that we're doing. And actually, about 70% of the GDP is consumer spending. That's why people say we have a consumer economy. Got to get people spending again. This is a consumer economy, right? Well, there's a problem with that. People are spending money they don't have. Household debt is way up. Disposable income is not, right? Household debt's gone way up and personal savings have gone down. Actually, consumer debt hit an all-time high here, where it's high as surpassed 2008. And you can see that the blue are mortgages in this graph, and the yellow is student loans. So you see student loans is as large as it's ever been, larger than it's ever been. And mortgages are a smaller piece of the overall debt than it's ever been. Well, that's bad, because a mortgage has an asset on the other side of it, has the house, has the value of the house. But our income is not increasing. Our houses are more expensive and our debt on our houses are more expensive, but our incomes aren't increasing. So we're increasingly in a risky situation. This is most people in terms of how many months could you go without income, right? And then that's what's happening here in 2020. People lose income for a month or two and you got a major problem, right? You'd have people can't pay their mortgages, can't pay their rents, have to shut down their businesses. People are spending money they don't have. And that's how we're driving the economy. Now, how are they getting access to that money? They're borrowing it through financial mechanisms that are owned in the stock market by where 20% of the people own 95% of the stock market. So all the interest and fees and everything off people borrowing money they don't have to buy things to try to drive the consumer economy is all feeding the people that own all the money in the economy anyway, right? Every part of our economy is speeding this consolidation process. And again, the reason why that's bad is because when it gets too top heavy, there will be a radical redistribution of wealth. It always happens, or at least it always has throughout history. Even if you pause it for a little while with some type of autocratic dictatorship to try to freeze things in place, eventually the dam will break. The wealth will be redistributed through our economy, throughout our society. Right, it's going to happen. So that's GDP, right? So let's talk about jobs next. Well, jobs tanked. We lost 20 million jobs, and then we gained back, I don't know how many, 8 million jobs, whatever it was. We're still down a ton of jobs. I don't mean to make light of it, but in terms of economics, macroeconomics, it's not a big deal that the jobs will come back. Jobs always come back. GDP's growing. Over history, there's always more jobs in the future than there were in the past. Jobs will come back. Problem is, in the meantime, lives get destroyed, right? We're not living in a world of macroeconomics. We're living in a world of day-to-day getting by. And the problems that I've been discussing about the true economic crisis, where you have the people's income flattening out, their wealth flattening out, their debt going up, all these things make it so that the loss of a job is detrimental, because you could lose everything in a couple of months. Right, because of these other economic factors. When we get the economy going again in terms of everything opening back up, people will get back to work. People will have jobs again. The problem is that they'll be in the same situation they were in before, where a job doesn't put them in a healthy financial situation necessarily, where most people's jobs barely keep them above water. And lots of people's jobs, you can work full time at minimum wage and you will be poor. You will be in poverty and have major economic poverty-related problems if you're a full-time employee working at minimum wage. That's just the way it is. So next is the stock market. The stock market is like GDP and jobs. It goes up. It's always gone up. It'll always go up. That's not the problem. problem with the stock market is not whether it's going to go up or down. Yes, I know I'm speaking macroeconomics, and when you look at a closed situation, stock market going down could ruin someone's life if it destroys their retirement investment and all that. So I don't mean to make light of that. But looking at it from the macro perspective, that's not the problem. It's not the problem of whether the stock market's going to go up. The problem is who owns the stock market, right? 20% of people owning 95% of the stock market, and only 50% of people even being in the stock market. Right? Only 50% of people have stock. So think about what that means. Right? People are working a job where the income level is basically paying kind of your basic needs. You're borrowing money to spend, which drives the consumer economy. That makes Visa and whatever company and all successful, who are owned by the top half of the population, who is making money off of this whole process. And then money in our society, money makes money, right? Money is like gravity. Put money in an account, it makes money. Put in a savings account, it makes money. I'm not saying that people are bad for participating in this. I'm not saying that at all. I have stock. I want to have more stock. I'm investing in my retirement accounts. I want to have more money in there because it performs. You know, I'm not chastising anybody or saying the rich are evil or anything like that. I'm just pointing out that the whole system works this way. This says from 1999 to 2013, so this is before our current, crisis, and it's only exacerbated since. The top 10%'s wealth went up by 75%, and everybody else's wealth went down. 90% of the country's wealth went down, while the GDP soared, while the stock market soared. That's the problem. The GDP doesn't represent the health of our nation anymore. The stock market doesn't represent the health of our nation. And even joblessness doesn't in the long term, because even if you get back to work in the system the way that it is, it's still heading towards disaster, and you're still going to be worse off in the future than you are now, even if you're employed. So this is the economic crisis, and we have to find a way to fix it. So this is, daunting and scary and big and bad news and all that stuff, right? Gloom and doom and all that. Well, it's not all gloom and doom, because we have the power to change this, and we can do it locally. Our chambers, our economic development corporations, our municipalities, our local county governments can work together to make some changes that will have impact on this. Here's how we do it. We focus on people, right? We have been focusing on the wrong things. When I'm in economic development groups and working with economic development organizations and chambers and whatever it is, we're always talking about businesses. The reason the business exists is to serve the interests of people. The business owner is better off because of the business. The business investors are better off because of the business. The business employees are better off because of the business. That's why we like businesses so much. And I'm a big fan. I own a business. And that's how I make my living, is with my own business. And I'm very proud of it. But it's not important in and of itself. It's important because of how it meets my needs as a person and how it meets the needs of the other people who are working there with me. It's about people. We got to focus on people. And this is important because we lose sight of that. We're all often thinking our audience is businesses far away that we're going to try to recruit. Or we're looking at, tax policy for businesses. Whatever. Chambers are looking at ways to have a voice for business. We don't need a voice for business. We need a voice for people in business, right? A voice for people who work for businesses, who own businesses. We got to focus on people. And this might seem trite or simple, but it's profound and it's fundamental to the way we approach this kind of stuff in terms of our economy and in terms of our community. So what does it look like to focus on people? Well, first of all, what do people want? Because we're supposed to be here to serve people, so we need to know what our customer wants. People are our customer. What do they want? Well, people want to be safe, healthy, and happy. So then what's a good community? Well, if a community exists to serve its people, a good community is a place where everyone can be safe, healthy, and happy. That's what a good community is. So we got to make sure, we got to go back to the drawing board and make sure that everything we're doing has to do with our people of our community, all of our people that live in our community, that every decision we're making has to do with those people being safe, healthy, and happy. And here's what people need. They need housing, they need food and goods, They need health care. They need child care. They need occupation, something to do with their time and their energy. They need recreation. And then they need long-term care. Now I don't mean that in the terms of assisted living facilities necessarily. I mean they need the wealth to be able to take care of themselves beyond their income earning years. Right? People have to have all these things to be safe, healthy, and happy. And a good community works on making all their citizens, all their people, safe, healthy, and happy. So a good community works on all 7 of these things. Now, the way the private market works is that occupation is used to provide these other things. Meaning, you go out and work, that's how you make money. With the money you make, you can buy all these other things. Right? As long as the infrastructure is there, the municipality, the county, the government provides the infrastructure, you go out and get a job, you make money, you can buy all these other things. Now, if everybody got a job that were paying tons of money, yeah, that might solve the problem. But you have an economy that's not working that way. A lot of jobs are not valued. Their price tag of their value isn't enough needed to be safe, healthy, happy, functional in our society. So this is a kind of typical expenses calculator that was done by a group at MIT, and it calculates for all over the country. So this is for Lorain County, Ohio, and this says that one adult who has one child needs to make $48,000 a year to have a livable wage. One adult with one child. $48,000 a year is a lot of money. It's a lot more money than lots of people are making. I mean, you look at wage distribution. This is Lorain, but it's alongside the United States. It tracks pretty well alongside the United States. Most people are making less than $50,000 a year. That's most of the population. So what do we do about it locally, right? What do we do about it? Well, if you're wanting to affect positive change in the world, you got to go through this process. You identify and articulate the problem. That's what I'm trying to do now. There's a big problem, that's a big national problem that we need to all acknowledge. We need to try to remove political and philosophical disagreements and emotional trigger points from this conversation and just acknowledge, based on economics and math, that we got a problem. We got a system that is rapidly consolidating wealth to the place where it's past a tipping point of some kind. It's happening exponentially, and it's creating all kinds of fractures and problems with our financial system, and it's making it so that the whole concept that was true during the baby boom years, where the wealth was the most widely distributed in the history of our country, the truism of that if you work hard, you're going to be successful, is disappearing, and it's a problem. So that's identifying and articulating the problem on a national scale. Now we've looked at identifying and articulating the problem here locally. It's basically that we've got to get people employed, but we have to get people employed in a way that is getting them to earn enough money to be living positively in the community. They've got to cover all their livable wages. They've got to be able to cover all 7 of those concepts. They've got to have health care. They've got to have child care. They've got to be able to have some recreation time. By working full time, they need to be able to achieve those things. So once you identify and articulate the problem, you got to design a solution that makes that problem be an opportunity, right? That's easier said than done, but how can you capitalize on what looks like a problem? And then once you do that, you can design, plan, and implement some type of specific project that will capitalize on that opportunity. So here's an example of how you can capitalize on this problem and turn it into an opportunity, some place to start. You guys are already focusing on workforce there in Lorain County, right? You got some great groups at play. Team NEO, Ohio Jobs, the Lorain, the community college. You've got programs, you've got funding. I mean, y'all have a program that's going to reimburse 95% of the costs of training your existing employees. You've got a program that can pay people essentially to be trained so that the person starts making money day one right out of the gate. These are great programs. got to get out and market these programs, signing up businesses that want these people. But it needs to be a little more to it. We need to do what I call silos to synergy. You already have your workforce groups working on workforce. You need to look around at other organizations that focus on things like childcare, healthcare, food, financial and wealth building, things like that. Because you're trying to basically look at all 7 of the need areas of your population. So you got to look at ways to approach all of this. So when you're looking at workforce, think about how you can use these other areas to help you be successful. Look for other organizations that focus in these other areas and think about it like this. What if you were able to approach a population of people like those low earners in Lorain? Let's say it was predominantly women, because if you look at your poverty rates in Lorain County, and in the nation, you're going to see the highest poverty rates among females between 20 and 40. What are females usually doing during those ages? Raising all of our babies, right? So if you can approach those women and you're able to say, hey, look, you could come to work on Monday and you would have excellent child care. You bring your kids. You have health care immediately and you'll be paid. You come to work, you'll be paid, right? What we're going to do is we're going to train you to do whatever. Say welding or whatever you want to do. You pick from a list. That list isn't arbitrary. It's based on existing jobs. The businesses have agreed to participate, and the pay needs to be a livable wage, right? It goes from people being in this training program, they move over into an employer. Employer gets to decide whether they want to bring them on. They hire the person, and they got to pay them $20 an hour or more. You don't have to force companies to do that by making a law about it. You just say, hey, this is what it takes to participate. If you want to be part of this program where we're going to find people, train them, get them a proven track record for you and hand them over to you. If you want to be part of that program, then you got to pay people $20 an hour. North of that, you got to provide benefits. It's got to be a good job that has a net positive outcome for the community, because we are the community who are paying for this, who are organizing this, who are executing this. The community college, Team Neo, Ohio Jobs, the Chamber, those organizations represent the community. So if we're going to put the community's money, time, and effort, then to help the business have an employee, then the business has got to be employing that person in a way that's net positive for the community, meaning they got to pay a wage that's a livable wage. So this is just an example, how you could take the existing workforce program that you have that's already paying people to train, it's already paying employers to reimbursing them for costs of training. And you partner with other existing organizations in childcare specifically, but also healthcare. And you have it be that when the person comes to school on day one, they're getting excellent childcare and healthcare. And you go recruiting people, focus on people. You go into the areas where you have your poorest folks, focus on women, focus on black women, focus on women that are the highest populations of poverty. And then you bring those women into the fold as being trained. All of a sudden, they got excellent child care, they've got insurance, they've got a job, they're making good money. They transition right into a private sector job. Things are going great, the community's better off. That's an example of how we can approach this locally. It's by changing what we focus on. We got to focus on people. We've got to not think about the people who are struggling as being the problem. We got to quit thinking about people who are struggling as being bad people, right? The community exists to serve all of us. So, in summary, the real economic crisis in this nation is not the current financial crisis. It's underneath that. And it's based on just the forces of macro historical economics, right? Money will consolidate and then it will redistribute. We have been consolidating to where we are at the point, we're back at 1929, right before the Great Depression, right? We've got to figure out a way to redistribute the wealth in this nation so that we can recreate the situation that the baby boomers experienced, where most people have access to some level of wealth and and can move up and improve over time. We've got to recreate that by redistributing the wealth in the nation. And it's going to happen, but it's either going to happen very painfully or we're going to have to do it intentionally. That's the national economic crisis. How does that play into your local community? Well, basically that most people are getting poorer, right? I mean, the incomes may be going up a little bit, but people in general have less net worth, more debt, less assets attached to that debt, more volatility around those assets. They have less investment in the stock market. You know, people are getting poorer in practical ways. Locally, you've got to make it to where getting employed solves these other problems. You got to focus on people. Whether the person owns a business, runs a business, or works in a business, that's who we focus on. And if we're focusing on people, then we design our projects differently. We design our organizations differently. Don't think about training as a tool to provide to an employer. Think about training as part of a package of what you're providing to a person. They'll be trained for the job, provided health care and child care, and then they transition into the private sector. They're working for an employer. They're being paid a livable wage. They can afford child care and health care. And everybody's better off. The employer, the person, the whole community.
Get a job, get it fast, and never again go to class. Pack your car full of things, go spread your wings, find a new